We start? Okay. Thank you for the lights. Allora, diamo...
So let us begin our work. Here we are at our working group meeting for today of the European Socialist Party in the Committee of the Regions. And we are here together with our colleagues from the European Parliament. We'll be working with them, with the S&D group, when we move on to our Together event. Now, I should like to start with a few words of thanks. I'd like to thank people personally, as in my own capacity as president of the group, but also I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody in the group. I'd like to thank our French hosts who have welcomed us here, starting with Andrea Viola, who's the president of the Ord Departmental Council. Thank you for welcoming us here. You made the suggestion that we should hold our meeting here. And so thank you very much indeed for that initiative. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you for yesterday evening. Thank you for the work this morning. Something we all very much appreciated. We had an opportunity to see some of the projects working in practice. Some of these projects, of course, which have been supported by the European Social Fund. But we also very much appreciated the quality of the food, I must say, the hospitality that we've received, and this lovely city of Carcassonne, and indeed the whole area. So thank you very much, a heartfelt vote of thanks. Now, we also have Carole Delga, the president of the Occitanie region. She'll be arriving soon. She's not here yet. So thank you to her as well, though, who is president of this region. Thank you for the welcome and the hospitality which she has shown. And thank you also for the fact that she will be taking part. Now we've got Karl Heinz, who is the president of the Committee of the Regions. Thank you very much to you too. You've been following our work since yesterday. And you will be working along with me in the second part. So he will be there later, and we'll be actually attending the group meetings work at a very important part of our works, of our group's work, and indeed in future work. Now, there is going to be a third president from a region, Susana Diaz, who is the president of Andalusia in Spain. A great region, of course, in Spain. which is a region run by socialists, and Susanna there has a great deal of experience in the field of politics and socialist politics in particular in Spain, and she will be providing us with some help as well by providing her input of her own experience. Now, I'd like to thank Virginie Herz as well for her work in coordination, and also the journalists who for the work that she's provided. And I would just say that I'd also like to thank our friends from the French Socialist Party, because Olivier Faure will also be taking the floor. That's a great honor for us. It's a great honor for us to have him here and have a contribution from him, from the National Secretariat. And it's going to be very interesting because we are going to have a contribution from a leader who actually launched the work of socialists and threw down some of the challenges at local level in cities and local areas. Now, as I was saying, this has been a very welcoming place, but I think that, as we were saying last night, this historically has always been a very welcoming place, a very welcoming area. It's been a place where there have been many social struggles. If you look back in history, you'll see the presence of the socialists there, progressives working in this area. But what we're going to do in our work is to take an innovative approach. And what we were doing this morning, actually, was to have a look at some of the actual practical projects which have been set up, good practices which have been set up, and things which are actually working on the ground at local level, and things which have been set up with the help of the European Social Fund. So we've had a chance to see what's actually being done and what can be done to help citizens and to help people setting up projects and help people who have certain needs. So this was very interesting. We had that visit, and I think it was very interesting to see the school and how we have tangible results now, and how people's needs are actually being met, and that has improved people's quality of life. Now, the work we're doing today is very important to us, and that's not just something I would say as president of the group, but I think it's something I would say as an Italian in this case, the president of an Italian region, because I think that now we need to work with skill and with courage in trying to create innovations. We are facing a challenge, and Europeans in general in 2018 are facing a challenge. We know that there is now a rise of populist forces, and there's a rise in the far right in Europe of people calling into question the sort of rights which we have become accustomed to in Europe. And this means that we need to be courageous, and we need to be skillful in our dialogue, and we need to learn to talk and talk to people. We need to support traditional socialist values, and we need to support these values in society as a whole. That's why it is very important that we work at local level and start there. That's what we'll be doing. We need to compare notes. We need to look at how social innovation can work. This has always actually been the lifeblood of our work. It's something which we, the socialists, have always worked on, and we need to use your ideas, and we need to work together to make sure that we can have the government working together as well with people, so that we can support people's citizens' rights, their socialist rights. And we, the socialists and progressives, must do that together in Europe. And we should also be aware, I think, of how we can achieve this today. By calling on our own ideas, how we can not just form a government, but we need to have a proper project in front of us based on our ideas. Something which can achieve consensus amongst citizens, how we can be inclusive, how we can work against exclusive ideologies. And we need to try and diffuse people's fears. We need to try and come up with answers, and not just answers using traditional forms of welfare, because we have seen that there are certain weaknesses and limits with traditional forms of welfare. We found that this hasn't managed to meet all the challenges entirely. So, the two working sessions for this afternoon will be an attempt to try and get a greater understanding in our local areas. Looking at our own cities, our own regions, and see whether or not we can make those a testing ground for investment and social innovation. Setting up new projects which can produce useful ideas in the future construction of what we're trying to achieve, taking up this challenge. So we need to have a policy of consensus in doing that within Europe. We need to take a different turn, go in a different direction, and we need to make sure that we have the citizens and public opinion behind us in doing that. Today, we'd also like to work along with you to gain some understanding of your own experiences. And thank you, by the way, to all the speakers and rapporteurs that we will be hearing from. But this will be an opportunity to hear what we can do, how we can learn from each other's experiences, how we can see what's been done with the use of the European Social Fund. We can see where the strengths lie in our own public policy, and see what we can do to mobilize people and make sure that there is more social innovation. And we want to encourage this, not just because of the sort of values it enshrines, but we also need to think in terms of including this amongst the criteria for having access to all European funding. This should be one of the instruments that we focus on, that we use as a measuring stick for the quality of the investment which is being made through European instruments. Now, we shall be discussing a proposal later. We'll also be looking at the various opinions which have been produced by the European Commission and the Committee of Regions, and we'll be looking at the European Social Fund on that, the new one that is, and we'll see that there is a section devoted to social innovation. The idea is that there should be centralized management, and that out of the total fund, an amount should be set aside for that purpose. I think we need to try and work out whether or not that is going to be enough. Now we're going to hear from Susana Diaz, and I think her experience there might be very useful in shedding some light as to whether that is the case in that part of the meeting. And we need to look at what we should do as social. We need to put forward a different approach to support social innovation. Now, social innovation also is something which requires involvement by citizens. Citizens shouldn't just be seen as beneficiaries. That's not possible. You can't just see people as end users. I think we need to move away from that old-fashioned idea. I think you can't just see this as something which starts from government and moves down. What we mean by social innovation is that we have the people themselves taking part, the citizens playing an important role. It's important that they should be involved in developing innovation, setting up partnerships. They should be able to try in their own local areas to try and find out whether or not there are new talents. and talents which might be useful in terms of promoting innovation, something which will lay the foundations for social inclusion and promote solidarity. Something which I think is something new, something I think can only strengthen the sort of values of democracy that we support. I think that as socialists, that is something we ought to be able to achieve. We need to be open to this. There's no point just in talking amongst ourselves. We need to be courageous enough to take this outside and hold dialogue with everybody who might be at risk or who might or fear what is happening in Europe at the moment. This Europe which seems to be going off on a completely different tack from the sort of ideas that we might have. I think we need to be able now not just to go along a well-trodden path. That would be the easy way, of course, something which we know, we've seen how that works in the past. But what we need to do now is to try and meet people's expectations and meet their needs as they arise at the moment, particularly the needs of the younger generations. We need to be daring enough to do this in our planning and in promoting social innovation. And we are trying to do this, of course. But what we need to do is to take on board any elements of innovation which come out of the individual local areas. We need to get a clear understanding of what is actually happening in our local areas. We can't just say that we're going to use GDP as a measure of how successful and a community is and how much well-being there is. That's not enough. So this is the challenge we face. We need to be able to meet citizens' expectations and convince them that we are capable of taking action. It's not just policies that we need to introduce. Perhaps we need to rethink this and rethink our choices. And we need also to work with other forces in the European Union so that we can try and put forward a new idea of what Europe should be, something which involves solidarity of social values and the sort of liberal values which have been a feature of democracy in the past in Europe and which should be part of the future as well of our local authorities, local areas and of Europe as a whole. So this is what today is about. I think that today, as we work, we need to bear that in mind. We need to listen to other people. We need to think in terms of learning from each other's experience as a result of an exchange of views so that we can make another step forward to trying to meet the challenge which we now face as we move to the European elections. So thank you very much to everybody. Welcome once again. Thank you to all the members of our group and the committee who are here. As always, the Speaker kindly thanks the interpreters today. And particular thanks to Carcassonne and Aude. Thank you very much indeed, and Occitanie, who have agreed to host this work today. So thank you, and I shall now give the floor to André Viola, who will introduce our work. Thank you.
Merci.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you indeed, President, for those opening words. Now, I promised the organisers that as we've started slightly late, they can just compress my time and try to catch up some of our, make up for some lost time. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank all of our socialist comrades from this Aude department who have helped us together with the group organize this afternoon's event. And later on we'll be meeting I'm very pleased, obviously, to President and Karl-Heinz as well, here in my department. Now, I'm not going to repeat what I said last night. I mean, many of you were there, weren't you? But what we wanted to do was to give you a quick taster of what our department, what our area is like, without moving around too much. First of all, we tasted some of the products in the area. We came up with a program for local development in the 1990s, which was supported by European funds. Back in the early 90s, it was the first of its kind. It was a flagship at the time. Now, I wasn't working on that at the time, but it did do a lot to raise our profile in Europe. Turning now to today's subject, social innovation. I would like to echo what our President has already said. This really is a subject which is key today. Often in France, people say, oh, the French problem is first of all immigration. It's law and order. And then we see that, in fact, the top problem, if you ask French people, is the question of buying power. It's the question of social protection. So I think we're right, all of us, to put this topic at the top of our agenda. Our regions have an important role to play. And I think that we've come here together to build our European project. And if we want to build Europe, then what we need are role models, and the regions can play that role. That's what we tried to show you this morning, to give you a few examples of what can be done. And I think the worth mentioning examples, because these are partnerships between several local authorities, between municipalities, the département in France, the Occitanie region here in France with Carole Delga, and this school of second chances we saw at the end of the morning. So what we need is in these specific examples. And I'd like to thank you for that, because these are things which usually we don't highlight. And yet, this is the way in which we can show European citizens that Europe exists and that it's standing at their side in various aspects of daily life. And there's also this afternoon's debate. We're going to be able to share our experiences, and the aim, obviously, will be to come up with this agenda the President was talking about. Now, I won't go on much more than that, but do you remember all these questions of social innovation in France? Well, those are really, it's really the départements which are at the heart of all these issues. We have certain powers in this area, and what we try to do is to come up with continuous innovation. Now, I won't go into too much about Emmanuel Macron. We'll talk about him later. But he said, I want to have some kind of decentralizing pact with the local authorities. I would like the local authorities to experiment in areas such as solidarity. We're 13, indeed, from this area. And we said what we want to do is to carry out an experiment, for example, in basic income. It's not universal basic income, but it's basic income. I won't go into too much detail, that'll take too much time. But at least this would be a kind of income which would support young people, people aged 18 to 25 years of age. France is one of the few countries which doesn't have any kind of support activities for people under the age of 25. Well, Emmanuel Macron was still waiting for his answer. We met with the Prime Minister last June, and he still hasn't answered. Maybe he'll do that on the 13th of September, because President Macron will come up with a new plan for that. But I do have some concerns about that, because we're on the front line. And we haven't been consulted about this. We don't know what's going to happen. But in any case, I'd like to thank you for having chosen Carcassonne and Aude for this event and to discuss these issues, which I'm sure will be at the heart of the future issues in the European election campaign. Thank you.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être là. Alors, je vais
Good Thank you, Paul.
court. Donc, j'ai le plaisir d'animer.
I won't repeat what I think I said, but so it falls to me to chair the debate now on social innovation. I'd like to welcome those who are following us on internet, because this part of the event will be filmed and streamed on internet, and you can follow that on the PS Group's website. And you can also find us on the Facebook page. And on Twitter, the hashtag is social innovation, if anyone wants to participate perhaps in the debate taking place on social media. So we've got 2 hours ahead of us, and we're going to be talking about social innovation. The first section will be examples of good practice, good local projects. We've got examples from Italy, Portugal and Germany. And the basic question is, can these be replicated elsewhere? And the second half of the debate will be a bit more political and technical. That will be talking about what the tools the EU has to encourage social innovation. And we're having 3 women from trade unions, from civil society and from political level to have a debate with us. Now, for this first section, our speakers are already here. I have Michela Fanlini from Italy. I don't know if everybody knows Molise. I wasn't well acquainted with that. But apparently they left the Abruzzi in 1963. And they're going to be talking to us about their project Benefere, the city of well-being, and will explain to us what that's all about. We're also hearing from Basil Horta, the mayor of Sintra and member of the Committee of the Regions. He'll talk about a project of inclusion of young handicapped people, and Andreas Klimek, project manager from Bürgersystemzentrale in Germany, which is talking about a citizens' market somewhere between the agora and a shop. So by means of introduction, the idea is to have a debate, really. So do please put questions. We'll have a quick presentation of these projects to start with, and then we'll be ready to hear from you, your comments and suggestions. Michela, you have the floor.
Cercherò di rispettare la tua intimazione a stare nei 5 minuti.
I was just waiting for you to tell me there that I had to limit my speech to 5 minutes. Now, for 10 years, I was responsible for an area of 5,000 people in a rural area in Italy. And there's been a project set up in that area. And this project is focused on a particular town. It was a bit like Carcassonne, I suppose, at one time, but then it went downhill. And this was particularly the case for young people, became depopulated to a large degree. And now we've tried to call it City of Well-being. This is our project. So what have we done then? What we've done is decided to set up a centre for the elderly. We've got about 50 beds. And we've had innovation in social assistance medicine. We've tried to look to the future. We've worked in solidarity, and we've worked along with traditional methods away. We've tried to invest back in this area. We had particular problems with women being unemployed and youth unemployment. We've tried to work on providing support for the elderly, people who are becoming more and more isolated. Now, this is what Katusha was saying. I very much agree with the approach she described. We've tried to take a horizontal approach to dealing with these issues. So this is a case of urban recovery more than anything else, taking houses which have been abandoned and renovating them and trying to bring back value to the buildings which used to be given away because they simply weren't worth anything anymore. So we hosted these people in our historic centre. There are about 30 at the moment, and we're continuing to welcome people there. We had regional funding to help us do this, and we also had a national strategy backed by Fabrizio Barca. He was very much behind this work, and it was this bottom-up approach which was very helpful in this respect. And this was seen as one of the keys to future prosperity, to try and bring different parts of the country together and to try and fill in the gaps. I mean, for us, European socialists, it wasn't just a question of working towards economic goals, but trying to help the region as a whole. So we chose various projects. We had 17 which were chosen in the end, and we looked at those projects which might provide solutions and a way forward, and this is one of the results. So we thought and we also try to look in terms of people's rights. And in our area, we have about 800 million in terms of people coming into the area. We try to work on tourism amongst the elderly as well. That's something which we felt we could develop. So this is a project about where we can go next. Now, people have asked me to be very practical in what we've done, and so I'll move away from the description in the abstract of what this involves, but I'll tell you about what we've actually tried to achieve. We tried, I think, to work on the basis of one of the most important challenges, and that was to try and reduce inequality, because Italy is rural in many areas, but we also face problems of an aging population. We've got about 5,000 communes in Italy, and many of these are very poor, and they are not being recognized in Italy. There's this false idea that people have. It's a sort of Brexit idea where people are voting on the extreme right. And this is a clear signal, I think, to us that we need to work on this problem of absence of services in certain areas of our country. We're trying to do this nationally, and I'm also a delegate nationally. And I believe that the 6% which is going to be set aside for local areas should be higher. This is only one small part of what can be done. But this is something, I think, which can point the way forward for us. And I'm just finishing off, but there's the whole issue of tax incentives as well. I think that we need to do some work there and be more targeted. And so that somebody working on a very small scale selling things also has a role to play, and then it needs to be different. There needs to be a differentiation in the rates of tax for small companies. Now, these are all things which I think should be the focus of our new platform, and we need to look at the needs of these areas. That we've got this small project which has provided us a certain amount of help to some of our citizens, and I hope that we can work on this sort of thing together in the future.
Vous pouvez certainement l'applaudir.
Thank you much. Yes, you can give a round of applause. Thank you for having stuck to allotted speaking time. That does make us want to find out what's going on and come and visit your project. That's really extremely initiative. I'll have to call on Basilio Horta, Mayor of Sintra, who's going to talk about another project. Just one small technical detail. I think you've all managed now to put in your headsets for interpretation. And you can also speak Portuguese and Greek when it comes to the question and answer session. I'll give you the floor now.
Merci bien. Je voulais bien.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to start by thanking you for inviting me here, which gives me an opportunity to present our project, of which we're very proud, and I think it's very useful for our community of more than 400,000 families. Now, if I will allow me, I will now switch to my mother tongue, Portuguese, because we've just heard I can speak Portuguese.
O programa que vos estamos a apresentar chama-se Sintra Inclui.
So this project is called Sintra Inclusive. And we're set up for young people, but now we've spread it out to all citizens, whether they're younger or just young at heart. This is a partnership between the city of Sintra and a association called Parents in Network. This association is made up of parents of young people who have certain disabilities. The council is involved in its social services and solidarity services, and also by a strategic council of businesses. This is party of the local council and represents the largest local businesses in our region of Sintra. So 4% of Portuguese GDP comes from Sintra. So we have people from business taking part in this project as well. And the council provides jobs for these young people. So the objectives of this program are to ensure that we can provide support for young people. Young people have specific needs, and they if they need access to education, and they need to be able to get into the labour market once they finish their schooling. We'd also want to encourage young people to be independent and to be mobile, so they can be integrated in all kinds of different contexts. It's not just about employment. We're also talking about leisure activities, sport, culture. People have to feel integrated in those areas as well. And they have to be able to play a full role as members of society. So we're talking about active citizenship, where they take part together with other young people on the same level as other young people. We take particular care of the possibilities and skills that each young person has. We don't look at their limitations. Everybody has possibilities and possibilities. And if the state or the government wants to have a fair welfare policy, they have to encourage these young people. I think in closing, last but not least, there's also an important part of local authorities have to play when it comes to supporting people with disabilities. I think what makes this project so unique, we're talking mainly about people with mental disabilities, but now we're starting up a new project in a partnership between municipalities, between the mayor of Sintra and an association from Lisbon. People with serious mental disabilities are integrated in Lisbon, and they will be part of our project as well. So, in closing, I'd like to leave you with a few thoughts. Our development strategy in Sintra is based on social and economic development. And we're focusing on inclusive development. Sintra is one of 34 cities across the world who have signed the UN Convention on Inclusive Growth. And we think it's a great honor for our city to have done so. This means that our model of development is something which can be based upon and measured against the principles of social justice. And we do that by focusing on social rights. Financial added value, that's not really much of a yardstick for us when it comes to measuring the success of our project. What we look at first and foremost is whether our investments can tackle inequality and create perhaps new wealth, prosperity shared by all. Prosperity doesn't exclude anybody. Inclusive development means that we have social policy to include migrants, asylum seekers. People should be considered, first of all, as human beings who all have rights. People who deserve to be integrated and involved. We already have a few dozen migrant families with us, and that shows the kind of policy that we want to run. So, my friends, we want to be very much in line with the principles of the welfare state, and rolling that out on a daily basis is our challenge. It's a challenge for democratic socialism. And in Sintra, this is something which includes more than 50% of the population have voted in favor of it.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for giving us the basis for a fruitful discussion later on. Andreas Klimak is next, the project manager of the Bürgermarkt, the citizens market in Germany near Cuxhaven, which is sort of a cross between a shop and a marketplace. So I will leave the floor to you now.
Guten Tag.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here, and welcome. I'm very proud that I'm able to present our project to you. What is the Bürgermarkt, the Citizens Market? Well, it was founded in 2009 by my wife and I in Hagen, in the north of Lower Saxony. 3,500 people live in the village, and the nearest food shop is 2 kilometers away. And there's not much else there. There's a lot of empty shops and empty streets, and so we rented an empty shop unit and we set it out as if it was a shop with second-hand shelves and so on. We did it sustainably, and what we did that was clever was, instead of filling it with goods ourselves, we just rented it to other citizens in the village so that they can sell things they no longer need. I can remember when we took the foil away from the walls, and the mayor came along and said, well, congratulations that you've opened the shop, but they saw an empty shop when they came along to the the shop opening. They were like, well, what's this all about? And we told them, well, the idea is people come along, we rent a shelf to citizens, and they can sell their goods from that shelf. And they shook their heads when we told them this, but now it's 9 years later, and since 2016, we've been given money from the European Social Funds for social innovation in Lower Saxony in Germany. Now, how does this work? Well, we rent out individual shelves. The individual customers sign a contract. They get the right to use the shelf, and then what they do is they take things they no longer need from home. They bring it in, put it on the shelf, and then let's get to the point. if you rent out a shelf, you're completely responsible for it. You're responsible for putting things on that shelf, for putting the prices and cleaning it up when you've finished as well. Because we're not a shop in the traditional sense of the word. We're a marketplace. That's very different, really, to what you might think. But what that means is that we don't own anything that's in the shop. We're not responsible for the prices or for the assortment of goods in the shop. And it's great to stand behind the till in the shop. I do that every Saturday. It's the best job in the world, and I really enjoy it. Now, during 2015, when all of the refugees and asylum seekers came along, the local social services found themselves under more and more pressure. People needed clothes, and people came to us and said, well, actually, you can do all of this in the shop. And it's true that for refugees in our area, they see us as a big department store. They say to us, well, it's the best place to shop. You end up getting everything in sooner or later. And in fact, young mothers, for example, with a pram, they sometimes come in twice a day. And they come along and see, well, who's brought something new into the shop? What could we buy? And so in a way, you could see this as sustainable consumption or consumerism, especially because we have climate protection objectives. And so really, this is the most sustainable way you could possibly shop. We are reducing waste. Waste never even arises in the first place. And of course, there are people who don't have much money, and they have to think in a sustainable manner. And there are others who can afford to think in a sustainable manner. And there's no stigma whether you belong to one group or the other. And that's what's so great. We've created a living and a lively marketplace. We try to get people through the door. People who rent a shelf, they tend to be better off. They don't like going to a flea market. They'd rather come to somewhere which grants them a little more anonymity because they don't have to stand behind the shelf. In 2016, we applied to be part of the ESF Social Innovation project. That was a lot of administration, but we're very proud to have been granted in August, and we were told we should add further social innovations to our citizens' market, and we've brought more footfall into the centre of the village. And so now, whether you're in the bus station, in the refugee centres, in the sports centre, the old people's home, wherever you are, you can have contact points with us, free internet as well throughout the whole village. And so we found people are spending more and more time with us. 150 people come to our shop during the day, and we used to have empty shelves in the shop, but we no longer do. And now we found an empty office where we do voluntary work as well. The county town is 50 kilometers from where we are. That means you have to drive 50 kilometers, or you have to take 3 buses if you want to get to the administrative town of the region. And the local authorities are no longer actually responsible for what goes on in our village in the same way as they used to be. So we make a lot of use of volunteers, and there's a very low threshold to entry into our services. You come into our well-known marketplace, and on the door we have a door which is marked Form Fox. The idea is we offer all kinds of administrative assistance to different people who need help, like people who are disabled, the elderly, and so on and so on. They can come in and get some help and then leave. And more people are using this innovative service as well. So that was the first phase of the new services. The second is even more exciting, and we want to franchise what we do in different parts of Lower Saxony to spread out what we do, and want to help people who are volunteers to do the same thing we do in different places. So we, since 2009, donate €3,000 to various charity associations each year, and we say what we really do is we allow associations to use empty shelves in our shop for free. They don't have to pay any rent, and then they can come along and make money that way by selling products on that shelf. That tends to make about 3,000 euros a year for them. You can find all of this on Facebook if you look at Bürgermarkt on Facebook. And as I say, we have some very well integrated refugees who use our services. They belong to our shop and the community just as much as anyone else. We get people who are refugees, people who are not. We get old and young, and all kinds of people come through the door. If you're interested, please do ask questions, and the more people who are interested, the better. Thank you.
Merci, Andreas Klimek.
Thank you very much, Andreas Klimek. That's a project, I think, which reminds us a bit about the recycling project we saw this morning, in fact. And I think that you see in France and Germany and elsewhere, these recycling or free cycling projects are gaining ground, reducing consumerism and sustainability. That's becoming more and more fashionable and gaining ground. So we've had a brief presentation of these 3 projects, which are based around social innovation. Are there any questions? Now, I think one of the questions we should ask is whether we can recreate these projects elsewhere. Do you have questions? We'll start with you, the lady with the microphone now. Please tell us who you are and who you're asking the question to.
Vielen Dank. Das waren 3
Thank you very much. Those were 3 very interesting projects, just like the projects that we visited this morning as well. And I think that this is something we should replicate elsewhere. I've got a question to everyone who has presented a project, and let me quote someone very intelligent who said that it's the ability to integrate all people and to feel solidarity, which is what separates tolerant people from intolerant people. And the first project was aiming to try to reverse the decay of the centres of villages and to help older people. So it was said that they had also helped employment levels. Now, we often see that young people help older people. Is that something that you've had happened as well? Now, the second project I think is an excellent project, but I don't have a question there because I just thought it was excellent. It's great to integrate people with disabilities as well, and I think we've all got some disability or another, so we could all be seen as part of that group. And in the third project, the citizens market, which started in 2016, which started being granted funds in 2016. So tell us a bit more about that funding. How much money do you get? What does the support go towards? Now, of course, what does the long-term view look like in Lower Saxony? Moderator, thank you very much. We've had 3 questions, so I think, Michael, you can start.
Yes, there is funding. Sometimes people make donations, sometimes it's voluntary associations, sometimes it's the communal services which do that too. Civil services for young people, for example, people working in networks with social workers. Now, the way this has been organised has been supported by some cooperatives who bring together young women, about, as I say, 34 to 35% youth unemployment. And actually, we're moving up towards 40% now. Now, we managed to provide work to nurses, people like that, social workers, and that is something which solves a structural problem as well, obviously, by including them. And this helps the elderly people concerned, people who want to stay at home. That solves a structural problem for them. Sometimes the sheltered accommodation, but that is something which is not found in urban centres. People end up being in a situation where they want to remain in community and they want to be able to have services available. This is a whole philosophy, actually, behind the integration of the different generations into a community. It's like an extended family, if you like. And that's the plus point here. And this also provides employment. This may be part of the future development, part of our dream in developing our area even more. And we very often are aiming to work with people who are the worst affected by unemployment, women and young people. We've had this very long crisis recently, and that's why it's important to invest now in mountainous areas in the south, for example, where there are very high levels of young unemployment amongst women and young people. So by providing services to the elderly, we're able to do work in that area too. So social workers, therefore, are not just providing physical backup, but they can organize exercise classes, things like that, different types of therapy, and there is a market there based on helping the elderly, helping the elderly, is helping them and to feel better as well, not just providing physical services. So the world is changing, and working with young people can increasingly be linked up to working with the elderly. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Dans la mesure où une démographie un peu vieillissante.
Well, we've seen that the aging demographic profile in Europe is something that concerns us all. So I think it would be interesting to see how much we could replicate that project. We'll maybe speak a bit more about that later. I'm now going to give the floor to you, to the mayor. I think you have something to add on this project.
Merci bien. Bon, je crois, madame, que vous avez...
Well, yes, I think you're quite right. There were two questions I think you put. The first question is, how can one justify being indifferent to these injustices and inequality? I think there we have to look at our values and also the role of the state. Now, on the question of our values, I think social democracy is a humanist form of socialism. And when you look at the role of the state, well, the state cannot be indifferent when it sees this kind of situation and what I would call this construction of society which is unequal and unfair, and it's the poor or the weakest who suffer. Now, on this project and why it was we chose this project, well, we saw that young people and young disabled people, they were in school, and when they finished mandatory education, they just ended up being at home and staying at home and doing nothing. They weren't able to do anything, and it was a terrible situation. We couldn't accept it. So we, in the town hall, decided to reach out to companies who were able to we wanted to see whether they could give a post, a job to these young people. And so these companies picked out the young people, and we decided to reach an agreement with them to help set up a number of posts that they could occupy. And now we have dozens and dozens of disabled young people who work, and they work very profitably, and that, of course, is very important too. Now, when we on the question of mental disabilities, well, we've done an awful lot here, and we've broadened out our project to those who now have psychiatric problems, and this started in January, but we've already seen very positive results, and that's why we chose this project, because in society, I think those who need help from central government or local authorities are the people who are disabled. They are, after all, citizens with the right to be seen as first-rate citizens too. Moderator. Well, yes, this was a question. There was a third question, wasn't there?
Genau, die dritte.
Well, yes, there was. Third question. Well, we get €260,000 over 3 years. Those cover staffing costs, 60% of our staffing costs, 40% are paid by ourselves. And of course, we want to operate in a sustainable or self-financing way. We started our citizens' markets in 2009 with our own money, with 15,000 euros of our own money, and didn't get a penny of support. And we have 2 members of staff who were long-term unemployed before they started working with us. And we're very proud of the fact that since we got support from the ESF, we're much better known. We've doubled our turnover, and we're completely booked out. All of the shelves are taken from August to June, and the support we got really helped with that. We did a lot of very good PR, and we think that we can afford co-financing by way of our citizens' market, and I think that I'm the most expensive person in the whole project, and I think that we are negotiating for our future, and I'm very optimistic that we will be successful. I think the 5 markets that we already have, we're going to support whatever happens. It's my baby after all. You know, and maybe we won't grow any bigger than that, but I can't imagine that we won't.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Andreas. Now, I have got a question myself. Perhaps everyone could give us some figures. To what extent does the European Union provide financing for these projects? Just to give us some idea of this, and then we'll ask other people if they want to have the floor. Well, as far as the percentage of finance, 40%, more or less. 40% European financing. Now, from our local authorities, we got 30%, more or less. 200 million euros is more or less the overall amount out of that's for the solidarity and health budget. 1.4 million, and this has mainly been used for restructuring, as I said. Then we've got the private market as well. Buying, we've had 70,000 euros for that. So we've had cooperatives working, and now we're working with the private market networks, that sort of things, and so that's just been for the initial restructuring, in fact. So we'll be able to take 2 more questions then before we close this first part of the meeting. I think you had a question over there. Yes, I have got a question. My name is Christophe Huyon. I'm the mayor of Coulennes-de-Sarthe, which is an area where we have 50% social housing. We have welcomed a lot of refugees over the last 10 years. And the question I'd like to ask, really, is a question about women, really, who suffer most from exclusion. What sort of initiatives can you take that can be financed by the European Social Fund to provide protection and promote integration, particularly of women refugees, who are very often victims and victims of a precarious social situation? And women who are also very often the victims of violence from their husbands. Now, we've seen this sort of thing in our community. We've helped some women to reintegrate. In fact, some people have used the funds to promote fashion shows, things like that. What can be done in addition to this, is my question, to promote integration of women who, as I say, very often are the first to suffer from this precarious situation, particularly as a result of migration? Yeah, you're talking about refugees here, but what do you mean? Refugees from where? Well, we've got about 50 countries concerned, very often people who are from the Balkans or Afghanistan, Eritrea, Africa, and war zones, the Ivory Coast, and we have a tradition in France of integration, which some other countries don't have. people do come from different areas, got different skin colours in France from other countries like Hungary, for example. So this is something of a tradition in France. Yes, well, we will answer that very soon. But one final question, perhaps. Could you introduce yourself first, please? This will be the last question, then we'll give the floor back to the panel. Yes, my name is Dimitris Pazza from Greece, and I'd like to ask something. I'd like to ask Mr. Horta something, please. Is there any subsidy provided by the state, please, or the local authorities, is my question, for employment initiatives for people with disabilities, children with disabilities? And is there anything being done to promote the employment of those people? Any backup being provided in terms of what's being provided through the local authorities or through local funding? Are they given anything from the amount of money allocated regionally or locally? I'm afraid we've lost the microphone for the speaker.
Vous êtes sûr? Parlez fort. Non, non, allez-y. Et je pense qu'il remarche. Allez, essayez.
I think it's working now. Try again.
On vous en donne un autre. Désolé.
And could I ask Mrs. Fanelli something, please, about support being provided to the elderly and people and the young people who need employment? Was this something which had started before, or did this happen after this renovation programme? Because, as I'd understood it, this was part of the European programmes before, and then it became part of a private enterprise initiative later. And then, Mr. Clegan, please, could I ask something about the way this business functions and operates for your citizens' markets? Do you have volunteers involved? Are any of the volunteers in the area refugees or asylum seekers? Are they involved in volunteering in this shop? Thank you.
Bon, alors, ça fait beaucoup de questions là.
Well, a lot of questions there. We've only got 3 minutes, actually, to answer all those questions. So could I ask you, please, really to be concise in your answers? And actually, if you want to find out more details, maybe you could talk to people individually later in the corridors. But we'll try and give a very quick answer, shall we, to that?
Well, we are a GmbH in Germany. So we have volunteers who in the projects, and we work on a volunteer basis in the markets we planned for the future. So there's a whole broad range of voluntary activities. There are 2 migrants initiatives, and they want to start up a Bürgermarkt, and that will be done on a completely voluntary basis.
Achso, sì. Zwei ist besser als ein.
2 risposte.
Well, capital invested from the it's not the social fund, it's social development fund. Obviously, we've got we already had planned to invest in the historic centre. We had a tender to call for tenders for projects for young people, and unemployment was one of the projects, and this was a large-scale renovation project, so the citizens chose what would happen to their own town, and they chose what would happen to the architecture. And after the restructuring, what we did then was to select the cooperative which currently manages the services for the elderly. Now, it's still public property, basically. That hasn't been integrated into the cooperative, but there is a rent 900 per person. So what we've done then is to make use of the what was there in place to provide a channel for the services we wanted to provide. Now, as soon as you get to 20 or 25 people involved, you can employ about 15 unemployed people. Christophe, 2 answers. One on female employment, firstly, and then there's a more specific question that you were asking about. I very much believe that when you're dealing with areas of high unemployment, it's easier to find employment for women. Obviously, women of your own nationality, but other people as well. That is the sort of group that you can see being helped by this sort of employment. But then also, when you're providing support for elderly people, this provides work for women, of course. This work does fall on the shoulders of women in general. We have a very high proportion of that sort of work. And where you can provide this very useful form of employment for women. And then on the point about refugees, in my town, we have the ISPRA network. That's a public network for immigrants in general. Not all towns choose to be part of this. I think this is a choice people can be made. I think this is very much the sort of thing that socialists will choose to do. When you do have percentages to be respected of refugees. And I think this is a sort of initiative that all citizen towns can take. Obviously, pressure is being brought to bear by the fact that there is immigration of women as well. And there is pressure, as I say. Other parts of Italy don't have to deal so much with that issue. But I see what France is doing. I see some parts of Italy are choosing to work in this way, and I think that's a very good thing. Yes, thank you. But Basilio, could you answer quite quickly, please? Yes, this question of women and the role they play is very important. It's very difficult to deal with this in 3 or 4 minutes. But I must say that it's not just immigrants. We have carried out a joint venture in Sintra, and we've built 50 residences, 25 for the association and 25 being run by the local authorities. So this means that any women who've had to leave their own homes have got somewhere to go. They can stay there for 3 months. And it's all paid for by the local authorities. Now, turning to the issue of refugees, we have a lot of refugees because in Sintra we've got 38 different nationalities. So we do have some experience in this area. But in terms of teaching for girls and employment and in promoting dialogue, we are working on this. We're promoting intercultural, interreligious dialogue. And we very much believe that integration is the basis for peace. You can't have peace as a result of repression. You need to go back further than that. You need to welcome people and make sure people are integrated. That's very important indeed. In Portugal, we've got about 50,000 Muslims, and in Sintra there's 7,500, and we're very proud to date of the fact that we haven't had any problems with terrorism at all. Because they're Portuguese. They're involved in our culture, our sport. And we've made an enormous effort to make sure that people don't become isolated and that they are integrated. And that's why I would include women in that group as well, being supported by the local authorities. I don't think I've got any more time to say what I wanted to say. Yes, but I just do want to say, nonetheless, that when you're dealing or when looking at the disabled people, you said that we're all disabled, but there are some people who are more disabled than others, to be honest, who might require some extra attention. We have put the money in, and we've got companies providing employment, and these are companies who are publicly inspired companies. They have a contract with the local authorities, and they can do that for 14 years. And you'll find that for that 14 years, those companies have tax breaks, things like that. Yeah, so that's the last word of this last session. So thank you very much to the three of you, Basilio Horta, Michaela Fanelli, and Andreas Klimek. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. I think you took up the challenge there. You were very concise indeed. You actually beat the time. And if anybody has got a specific question that they'd like to ask, then please don't hesitate to talk to the speakers. They're there to talk to you if you want to know more. So we're going on to the second part now of this discussion. Still working on, or still talking about social innovation, looking at it from a more political, technical angle. Looking at funds, the sort of tools that we have available to us to promote social innovation. We have three women who are going to come up and talk to us about these issues. Susana Diaz-Pacheco, who's president of the Andalusian region in Spain, and she knows a lot about the European Social Fund. She's been a rapporteur in the Committee of the Regions on the social, so please, she will be coming up here. We've got Gabriel Bischoff from the Economic and Social Committee. She will be looking at things from a union point of view, and then Lieve Fransen, who's a member of the high-level working group in the European Commission on investment in infrastructure, or social infrastructure. So you were a doctor, so you know a lot about all these issues, so you can come up to the platform, please, and could we have a round of applause for our speakers?
Madame Diaz, je pense qu'on va vous laisser la parole immédiatement.
So, Mrs. Diaz, let's give you the floor straight away. As it was earlier on, what we're going to do is have a brief presentation of the various views and descriptions of these European tools. They're not projects as such this time, and then after that we shall move on to questions and discussion. So I'll give you the floor.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Mi agradecimiento.
So, good afternoon. Firstly, I should like to thank the Committee of the Regions for giving us this opportunity to take part in this discussion, along with Lieve and Gabriel. And giving us an opportunity to describe what's been done over recent years. Now, for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm the president of Andalusia, which is an autonomous community of 8.5 million inhabitants. And through its membership of the European Union, we have managed to benefit from our membership, and we've benefited from social and territorial cohesion and convergence. Now, we have tripled our GDP since Spain joined the EU. We have increased by 14 points our employment rates, and we have 5 times now the energy quota which comes from renewable energies in Andalusia. I think all this goes to show that the European funds have been a very useful tool indeed for improving people's living standards. Now, with Lieve and Gabriel, we've been contributing to the work in the opinion on social innovation, a progressive approach. Now, Andalusia is also giving this opportunity and has been given this opportunity over recent years to try and tackle to a certain extent some of the roots of the crisis. And we have worked on health, we've focused on education, and we've tried to work in an innovative way to do that. Now, I shall give you an example of the sort of innovative approach I'm talking about. In Andalusia, we have the highest number of people who are being cared for through telecare. About 200,000 Andalusians are being cared for through teleassistance. That's to say, people whose families might need to have a break sometimes are being helped in this way. And this provides a lot of employment as well. Another example of social innovation would be something similar to what you probably have in other European countries. But I think we have a system whereby we can pay virtually 99% of the fees for university education for young people. Now, that's a situation, that's the sort of approach which I would think is a very good one. And so from 0 up to university age, we provide free education. Now, if you have a problem with demographics, you have to make sure that people have equality of opportunity. Now, people who have a responsible role or who have a role to play in government have to take action along these lines. Now, the EU, I think, in itself has to be innovative in promoting cooperation across the board. And what we want to do is to make sure that people can be involved in the labour market on an equal footing. And we need to make sure that as soon as a child starts his education, they're on an equal footing and that there's equality, so that people can develop educationally on an equal footing. And we shouldn't just make this available to people who can afford to pay for it, because this is something the government has to be responsible for providing. And that's why I'm very happy to be part of this panel with Liv and Gabriel. Now, we've had the economic crisis, and we've seen that this has been used to dismantle our welfare system. And you'll see that as a result of this, inequality has increased. There's inequality between the north and the south, between urban areas and the countryside, inequality between men and women, and inequality between the elderly and young people. And when you talk about trying to combat depopulation, then you need to make sure that you also combat social exclusion in urban areas. And you can't do that without good quality public services and without good employment opportunities, so that people can support their families. We need to make sure that we have proper equality between men and women. We need to make sure that we have integration between the elderly and young people. We've seen this sort of thing. We need to make sure that elderly people are given the attention they deserve at a later stage in their life. And I think one thing we've seen in particular in the economic crisis is that we used to take for granted what we had since the end of the Second World War. People have taken it for granted that our children will have a better life than we will. But that's not necessarily the case. I think that we need to make sure that this is the case, so that people can have trust in the people governing them, and indeed the European Union. We all have to try and avoid two very obvious risks, which we'll be looking into in a bit more detail very soon. For example, when we come on to the European elections, people who don't believe in the European Union will be increasing suffering and inequality. I think that we have to work towards mending the problems which have been caused by the economic crisis. We need wounds to heal. And this is not what populism is going to do. You can say that you're a skeptic, but I think that's a rather banal way of putting it. It's understating the case. This is an enormous risk, And we need to combat this by making good use of the European social funds. And in the 2020 to 2027 period, we're going to be working a lot on European construction. Now, I was listening to the President of Umbria last night, and I was hearing about immigration, and I know that is an issue in our country too. In Andalusia this year, we had 4,000 unaccompanied minors, and it's much more than last year, and we're not at the end of this yet. Of course, this is fertile ground for anybody who wants to promote xenophobic ideas and racism in the EU. And the European Social Fund, with its 100 million euros, is something which we can use to combat this. One priority is to promote employment, and youth employment in particular. Now, we do have youth unemployment which is far too high, and if that continues to be the case, then you're going to be frustrating the ambitions of people who are our future. Having a job is a way of guaranteeing that people can have equality of opportunity and guaranteeing that people can have dignity. And I'm saying this now when you see certain attitudes developing in the EU. We're not just talking about the freedom of the press. What we want is to continue to protect the people who need protecting in the EU. We want to make sure that public services are not stripped back and health services are not stripped back. We've got training funds which can be used to target that area. Then, thirdly, we were talking about dependency and training for social inclusion. We need to stop people who are vulnerable being excluded from society through making good use of the social funds. And that, of course, is very much linked to the next issue, which is the issue of immigration. It's not just the border areas which have to deal with issues. You've got labour integration, which is very important as well for immigrants. And I think there's a lot can be done through European funding in that regard. I think we have seen what's happening on our borders. We need to take a realistic look at what is actually happening, but you also need to take a realistic approach to how you try and solve problems. You can only do this through a shared approach. You can only deal with some of these issues by working together, something which is very close to our hearts, and make sure that what we do can be compatible with what's being done by the immigration and asylum funds as well. We shouldn't be working alongside them. We should be working together, or not duplicating what they've done. So I have made a similar appeal to the President of our own country, that we need to take a collective approach to providing a shared response. If we don't work together in this way, we will be the losers, and this is going to be something that people who want to work against the European Union will use to their advantage. And I think we should be very proud that we're part of the European Union. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour ces paroles.
Well, thank you very much for that, and for having that highlighted the extent to which the European social funds are critical when, in times when populists are trying to gain ground in Europe. Now we'll move on to Gabriel Bischoff, President of the Workers' Group of the European Economic and Social Committee, who comes from a trade union background and will give us that view of the current situation.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, to this debate. It's a pleasure to be here with you and discuss it, and I did find it a very good approach to start with the practical projects and then from there come to the more political debate instead of doing it the other way around. I mean, for the well-being of workers, and if you perceive workers over the whole life cycle, from birth, over school, training, working, being unemployed, being a pensioner later, social innovation is key for the well-being of workers. And at the same time also trade unions, representatives of workers are always also actors of social innovation, especially also in the workplace, but not only there, because they know that it's key, because social progress depends very much on social innovation, and especially if we look at key drivers for change in society. And therefore, and a lot of people, I think almost everyone mentioned three words: the upcoming European elections, the growing populism, and the migration issue. And I think it is very obvious that Europe really needs a positive agenda for the future. And that with this it needs a very strong social agenda that can deliver the progress that is necessary. And here, from a worker's perspective, I want to mention the key drivers of change and the key challenges for the 21st century. It is that we have to face digitalization, we have to face climate change, we have to face migration, and we have to find new and also innovative answers to this. And therefore, and it was also mentioned, not only the social pillar will play a key role, because it was a new agenda setting, saying after all the social wounds we have, and Susanna mentioned this very much, with years of austerity policy, with an increase of poverty, with an increase also of inequality in the last years, that we have to give people hope that we can change that we are willing to change it, but also that we have the means to change it. And here the social funds play an essential role. And therefore, I think this debate on the future of the European social funds and of the cohesion funds will be essential, because also we, as the Economic and Social Committee, we said for the beginning, yes, we need the social pillar, yes, we need to focus on delivering, and we need the necessary resources to do so, to have the social investment. Because if you look at Europe at the moment, we have a huge investment gap. And I'm coming from Germany, a country that was lucky because it was not so much hit by the crisis, and still we have a huge investment problem in the infrastructure, and we have to change it. And therefore I think when we discuss the future of the funds, and when we discuss the social pillar, we have to also address the problems behind it, and this is that we still have a fiscal compact that is limiting very much the governments, it is limiting the regions, it is limiting us in social investment and in investment in general, and we have to address this. Also, this is one of the reasons why we as trade unions are pushing very much for this debate on a golden rule for investment, and especially for social investment, because we have to come out of this crisis and we have to show people that the social pillar is not just one of these ideas that are more real on paper than in practice. And if you would ask me to pinpoint it down to one sentence, and for me this is that if you see what is social investment and social innovation about, and I think the message has to be that we are willing, with the challenges I described, that we will leave no one behind, and that we will mobilize our resources here when we are addressing the digitalization, the migration issue, and also the climate change that will put a lot of jobs in danger, that we will qualify people, that we will enable them, and that we will protect them. And for us, this gives workers a bit of hope that we will have a European Union that takes it really serious to protect the people and to enable them to have a good life in the future. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Gabrielle.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabrielle. Leave no one behind. That's almost a campaign slogan, isn't it? Now we'll hear from Lieve Franssen. She's going to give us a complementary approach with some facts and figures, I think. Lieve Franssen is a doctor who's worked in developing countries, if I'm not wrong, and has worked on AIDS, and is currently member of the high-level task force of the European Commission. And this task force is working on investing in social infrastructure. I'll give you the floor, and I hope that we'll be able to see the figures that you've come up with us. And as I say, please stick to the speaking time because you want to have questions and answers afterwards.
And I try to be as short as possible, but I'm waiting for a tool. But I'm very happy to be here, actually, to share. I feel that we share the conviction that social protection, social welfare systems, what I call social investment systems, are really the pride of Europe. I'm also convinced that we need to innovate large scale, and therefore that we need to invest large scale and long term. And that has not been done in the past, as some of you have said. I was also in charge of social innovation and social investment when I was Director of Social Policies in the European Commission. As some of you know, I've now left the Commission 3 years ago, and I want to focus, as you have talked about the social policy, the social programs and the social fund, I will really focus on, with a few minutes that they give me, on the results of a high-level report that I co-authored. It was presided by President Prodi, and there was a high-level task force working very closely with the Commission on this. And so I want to use slides because I think I want to share with you some of the figures to make this also concrete from a different perspective. I enjoyed all of the concrete proposals and the projects that you had, but now I really bring this also at the macro level in a way. So the high-level task force came together under Prodi and together with some of the people in the Commission, really to see why don't we have more social investment and social infrastructure investment specifically for the moment. Specifically also because we were very disappointed with the results of FC in that context. So it was not an easy work to come to the data, but basically we focused on 3 main sectors: education, lifelong learning, health and long-term care, and affordable, energy-efficient housing. These 3 areas really make the total a large part of what is needed in the social areas and the social welfare systems in a way. And we came to the calculations after a lot of it was not easy to come to the fact that we have for the moment 170 billion investment per year in all of Europe together in 2015. Sounds like a lot, okay? In a way, when we looked at the details, it's really not sufficient, and it is already 20% lower than in 2009. So the crisis really pushed the investments lower, specifically in these areas. Some of the areas also need major innovation. Education and migrants, for example, we need for the first time again adult education. We also need long-term care. Very few countries are prepared for the long-term care of older populations, as we have heard from some of the examples. I have no time to go into this, but the innovation is needed everywhere, long-term and big scale. The affordable housing is a crisis across Europe in a lot of countries, and we don't only think about the specific countries that we know about, but even here in France and Italy, we have really housing problems and energy efficiency and affordable housing. I'm not talking social housing, I'm talking affordable housing. So that is very much the state. No, okay. So the second thing we came to is what is now the gap? This is the investment, so what is the gap? We came to a conclusion, basically, a very, very minimal calculation that we come to 150 billion gap per year. Okay? That we calculated and calculated again and again and consulted very widely to see if this was really the figure, because that means that we need 1.5 trillion between 18 and 30, which means 3 times the Juncker plan for the moment. Okay, so good. We made several. As I said, when we looked then at FC, and we discussed very much with the EIB and with the FC, and we're still in discussions with them. And with the different departments in the Commission, but it came. Our task force came very much from the fact that in September 2017 we had only 4% of the approved FC financing is supporting social investment infrastructure projects in the EU. Okay, so that's this little. I'm not sure if you can see. That's the little pink strip. There has been a change in the FC2 now, and the extension with the ID that. But we also made a very extensive analysis, and I think the report goes into detail of that, why that is. Because when you talk to the social people like you here, they say, okay, there's so much need, there's so much project, there's so much innovation around there. When you talk to the investors, including the EIB, they say, well, there's no projects. There is no bankable project, no bankable project. So how do we bring that together? So we made a lot of suggestions, recommendations, strong recommendations. But one more slide that I want to show you before, because it's very relevant to you, and it was actually not in the mind of a lot of people in the Commission and the EIB, is that actually when you look at where do the public finances come from for these 3 major areas? Mainly from the local authorities. So, for example, housing 75%, the first column, is financed across Europe by local authorities. The education is 50% financed by local authorities' budgets. Health is a bit less, it's 36%. So this was not in the mind of the people that looked at big-time investments projects. It also means, because of the crisis, there was a very strong push at national level, but that push was pushed down also at the local level. And so they were squeezed, the public finances were really squeezed. There we see that because of that, only 1 out of 100 projects, for example, is less than 30 million euro. It sounds a lot, but in a way it is. These are small projects. These are small projects. They don't attract private investors. So we need to come to bigger projects, and to do that, we need to come to more resources, long-term resources, and we need to come how to work better with local authorities with these instruments that the Commission and other institutions are developing. Now that really inspired, I think that's my last slide, but that really inspired in a way, and I'm very proud and happy about that, the new Invest EU. So I'm not talking about the social fund, although this is also very important, of course, but the new Invest EU, I plead with you to look at that. There is a new, really innovative part. There's a what do you call it, a window for social infrastructure, for social services, and for and skills. That, I think, in a way, it still doesn't have enough. For the moment, what is proposed by the Commission is 4 to 5 billion guarantee that will provide 50 billion for 7 years. As I said, basically, we need much more than that. But I'm happy already that this is a beginning going in the right direction. That would mean 50 billion over 7 years. But what is also new in there is that we can, this system of InvestEU can now be implemented also at local level with the help of other implementing agencies, with the EIB of course, but also with implementing agencies like the national public banks. Here in France is Caisse de Dépôt, in Italy is Cassa Deposito, in Germany is KfW. They all three worked very much with, they were the clients actually for this report, and they are really very much interested in that. When I talk to private investors per se, they are actually also interested. They have for the moment worldwide 100 trillion capital sitting there and having a problem to invest. And they are willing, in a way, a lot of them, to invest 5% of these trillions. But that is worthwhile to look at. So my plea is to crowd in these private investors. We will never have enough public investment capacities anymore. The social fund is very important, but it's not going to do sufficient. What is needed, because a vast, innovative program is needed for Europe, for adapting the social welfare system for the future that we all want. So that is my plea. So with the social funds and the structural funds in general, I would say there is much more possibility to do bundling of projects and blending of resources. That is now made in the InvestEU program also much easier, and therefore I think there is a future possible there to really make a major change on the basis of the projects that you already have. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci d'avoir.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for keeping it so brief. Now, we now enter the home stretch. And we already have some hands going up. We'll take two questions over here, first of all. Could you please introduce yourselves when you ask your question and say who you want to put your question to.
Christophe.
Hello, Christophe Clergeau from the Loire region, a rapporteur of the framework program Horizon Europe. I'd like to make a comment and then put a question. This comment is maybe be worth thinking about having an agenda for innovation across all European policies in the plural, because there's ESF Plus, and we also would look at the framework program for research, because there are some projects which look at social innovation in European research policy. So my question is more on InvestEU. Now, I'm in favor of this kind of financial engineering, and it's put forward by the Commission as being a substitute for any shortcomings in the EU budget. So can we please understand which kind of project can be funded by financial engineering and private money? Because we'll always need some kind of public support. So let's just be clear what we're talking about, to weigh things up and say that this is not going to replace public support. Otherwise, some projects wouldn't be able to be carried out. Was that a comment or a question? That was indeed a question.
It's a very good question, and I've not had the time to. I try to keep 5 minutes, but one of the, and I fully agree with you with the importance. But I think from the perspective of the discussions we had in the task force and with several of the banks, was really to make sure that we, by crowding in private resources that are loans and that have to be returned, you could free up public money to do the services. The private resources will basically be used for the infrastructure, for the big change projects, or possibly for research anyway, depending on the structure of the return of the funds. But that would free this, what I showed, what the local authorities for the moment invest in infrastructure, for them to be able to then work on innovation and on services more. So, and that's why you need to bundle and blend these, blend the resources and bundle. And one of the proposals also that is quite clearly tested already with the EFSI for the moment is developing investment platforms. So you have these different areas in there. And there I would see even support from the Horizon 2020, for example, to accompany the learning process at large scale of the learning process that a lot of the smaller projects that we've heard now need to be brought at large scale, and we need to learn how to do that at large scale and document that. Okay?
Oui, allez-y, Gabriel.
Go ahead, Gabriel.
I would like to raise the attention to the question behind your question, and that is we have to look really carefully in the political choices we are doing. So on one hand, we need the necessary room of maneuver for public investment, and to do it in the key elements, that is housing, for example, social housing, it is education, and a lot of these areas. A criticism we as the workers group had, and we had a little study done on the Juncker plan, is that the alternative is to push for more PPPs here in investment. And you have to have here not only a short-term perspective, but a middle and long-term perspective. And what we see is that PPP is very interesting for the investors, but in the long run, not really for the communities, etc. And I think on one hand, we also have to discuss really where it is useful to have this kind of project, and where politically I think it would not be my progressive agenda, really. And I think this is an important debate we have to do now. And one last point. I mean, I stick to the 5 minutes, but I'm very, very concerned that with the plans we have on the table on the ESF Plus, and with the debates we have on the multi-annual financial framework, we will not have more room for social investment, but less, until the national governments are not willing to increase the EU budget. And I think this is an important point we have to discuss at this moment. As we know, we have the elections coming up. We want to have solutions before that, and that we have to make sure that we have enough alliances for and start to have a good alliance for a progressive agenda here, because otherwise that will be a high price to pay, because it will fuel the nationalists and the anti-Europeans.
Merci beaucoup. Susanna Dias, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter?
Well, perhaps you might like to add something.
Desde la experiencia de gobierno.
Well, in terms of the experience that I've had and experience in government, I no longer diabolize or demonize public-private partnerships. There are sectors where it's a very good idea, including in the crisis times, to use that kind of support without undermining the welfare state. And you have to draw a distinction between private profits and public welfare. And that's an important part of, I think, of the Juncker plan. In many of the meetings, we seem to be focusing only on private profits, and that makes it very difficult for agreements to be struck, because we have to make sure that public welfare or public benefit is an important part of the Juncker plan. And this is extremely important in areas such as health. There are many companies who want to make or do business in the health sector. And I think over the coming years, they'll be very very attractive. But at the same time, we need to be defending public-private partnerships where it is possible to do so, or where they're based on sound principles. I think I myself, as a socialist, will be keeping a close eye on the public-private partnerships. I'm talking about investments in infrastructure that can guarantee equality of opportunity. And in the Juncker plan, for example, we've seen that at some time the European Union doesn't put private profits and public benefit on the same level.
Eva Franson, you wanted to add something very briefly, because we do have more questions.
It is a very important debate, and I think I'm very happy that this group also takes up the debate, because I'm not proponing public-private partnerships in its classical way. I'm talking about platforms to crowd in the different resources, the different capabilities, and I'm always very convinced that the public role is very critical to say where needs to be investment, on what kind of conditions, what the quality is. And I think what I see in a lot of regions and a lot of countries that the public sector is not ready to do that yet. And so this is a new role for the public sector to really give stewardship on where this should be done and how this should be done. But this is, in my opinion, the only way to really increase seriously the investment and the innovation that is needed in these areas.
Merci pour cette précision. Donc on va prendre deux dernières questions.
Well, thank you for that. We're going to take two final questions, one after another. The gentleman first, and then the lady. Three questions, I'm being told. So, and then we will answer them. We'll take them all together.
Alors, juste si vous pouviez...
If you could turn the microphone on, please.
Buonasera, una domanda per la Presidente.
Could I ask the President of the Andalusian region a question? Now, I'm the mayor of Catania, which is a city which is welcoming a lot of immigrants. I've also been a Minister of the Interior. Now, I'd just like to make a short political point. It seems to me that given the political situation in Europe at the moment, we're not just dealing with a contrast between progressives and conservatives. That's the sort of thing we've been used to as a scenario. But at the moment, we are working on the basis of a contrast between people who are frightened and people who are courageous, people who are frightened and people who are prepared to take up challenges. Now, in terms of policies for integrating immigrants, could I ask, please, what recipe you have adopted to make sure that your citizens are reassured about the balance in their communities and that growth is a good thing? Thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour cette question.
Thank you very much for that question. Now the lady.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Ms. Franson for her presentation. And it takes me back to presentations I received maybe 15 years ago in London. That was when we had Prime Minister Gordon Brown and his Treasury looking at introducing public-private initiatives. And I would commend people who are interested in this debate to actually look and learn. There are some things that came out of Britain that was good, despite Brexit. And what you can see there is for example, health. When it was straight from the Treasury to the private sector with no engagement of the local, then it took so long for the local people to accept what was happening. Move on, and when you got the engagement of the school boards, the trustees, when then local government was, if you like, a third part of that engagement, so that Treasury, local people, local representatives, and the private sector, especially for, say, schools, then you saw success. And you saw what? Services that were being built, not just for 9 to 5 school, as we have in the UK, but for evening classes, for swimming, for the weekend, because the citizen, the local, had bought in. And I would just say there is learning to be had, and I'm so glad that Ms. Franson gave her brilliant presentation, and I look forward to reading her paper or seeing the video again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it was just a remark, not a question. Okay, donc on a le temps, donc du coup.
So we have the time for a further question. Olga Srien. I'm from Belgium. I'm the coordinator of the Econ Committee and the Committee of the Regions. My question is more financial in nature. We have the Juncker plan, and I think that we pin a lot of hopes to that, and the Commission is now talking about a structural reform plan, which will have major consequences. Now, I haven't heard anyone talking about a social innovation objective. People are talking about investment. They always repeat the word investment, but if you look at social cohesion plans, I think we are regressing vis-à-vis the objectives we could achieve, and we'll end up moving towards the elections without actually having any specific message to give to the people who pin their hopes on us. So we're talking about being inclusive, but what we're talking about here are large-scale partnership programs, and I really can't see citizens latching onto that straight away as being European initiatives which are linked to their brass tacks needs, their direct needs. Now, housing is a fundamental need, education, which of course is important for everyone, employment, youth, women, and so on, and those are being left to one side. So the question really is, how can we, in a progressive alliance, end up with inclusive proposals, but ones which also are specific and concrete in terms, and people will latch onto them? Because what you'll end up with is that all of the investments we think of as being fundamental, social, whatever they might be, on health, in schools, supporting the most fragile people in our society, all of those are being excluded from any investments that you might think of as long-term investments. The ESG standards, which are yardsticks for local and regional investment, are not being discussed by anyone at European level, and I think it's a real Damocles over us. Moderator, well, thank you. Yes, those are two very important comments. So let's come back to the first question. How can we reassure people who are worried about migrants? I think that's where the populists are gaining ground. So how can we reassure people? Susana Diaz.
Well, you can do that by strengthening public services. There's no other way of doing it. In the most recent history, if we're looking at the borders in the southern Europe, when we see the greatest influence of people coming in from other countries, we're talking about areas where there's a lot of public services, where there are a few private schools. Those are the areas who look after migrants best by using public services. When you're seeing this conflicts of poor people against poor people, what you have to do is strengthen public services. When citizens or people come to Italy, to Greece, to Malta, to Europe, and to Spain, they're coming to Europe. They're not coming to, Sicily, haven't got an idea to come to Malta or Andalusia. They want to come to Europe. So that means we have a collective responsibility. We have to put money in there to combat mafia, to combat the people traffickers. And the situation is different from 2015. In 2015, the main impact was people coming to flee from war, to look for safety and security for their families. Now, people coming to the European coasts are doing so for economic reasons. These economic reasons include climate change. They are suffering from that to a much greater extent than other parts of the world. As these are people moving across the world and looking to the continent which has the best level of welfare in their eyes. So we have to combat the people traffickers and give them opportunities back home for their own personal and collective development. And when they're here, obviously, we have to have the responsibility to look after them. So there are countries who don't want to take responsibility for their share of the migrant flows. But that's why we have to strengthen public services in those areas where the immense majorities of migrants arrive and where they may be conflicts in terms of education, of healthcare. In some of these schools, there are different nationalities, different languages being spoken. So care for people is something which will allow us to combat xenophobia. I share one thing with the colleague. The greatest fight that we have at the moment in the European Union is to defend democracy, and those who ought to be doing that aren't doing it, and that is just not acceptable. They don't guarantee the independence of the state powers. They don't guarantee social justice. The elections we'll see in Sweden and the demonstrations we've seen in Germany, these are areas where we have to defend democracy. That's why I share with you, comrade, that we have to say yes or no to democracy. And as socialists, we really have to fight that fight.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to add to that question about how to reassure people?
Gabriele. I'd like to add one point, and I very much agree with what Susanna said, is as someone raised the point that our societies are split in the ones that are frightened and the ones that are courageous. And I think what we have to address is that we have a lot of people that were hit in the past, that experienced a lot of insecurities. And I think that we really need this agenda, and a social agenda for me would be an agenda for hope for the people and to increase the number of people that don't fear about their future. And I think also therefore this question of the future of work and how equipped I am as a person to have a good job, to have a good income, to have a good training for my kids, a good education will be key. And I think here what we underestimate, I think when we debate the social funds or other funds, we often do it very technocratic about complex procedures, bureaucracies, but what we don't transport very much is that these funds are a key element to refocus the imbalances we have in Europe, and that these funds are key for key drivers for innovation and for a social Europe that delivers really for the people and is not just a phrase or something. And here I think also all actors have to rethink how to start this debate in a different way than we did so far. Because otherwise we will not transport what we intend to do with these funds, because they are not a means in itself to spend money or to invest, but really to improve the working and living conditions and to make sure that, for example, if some countries are hit much more by a crisis, that we in European solidarity use these resources and direct it there where it's most needed.
Et ça nous fait rejoindre peut-être la dernière.
Well, I think that perhaps links us to our final question. We've only got a few minutes left. I think the lady said that the projects weren't really concrete enough or tangible enough. So how would you counter that criticism?
Well, I would like to clarify that when I'm talking about large-scale partnerships is because we need blending and bundling, but I'm talking, and that is for the first time really possible also in the InvestEU, which was not necessarily possible in the EFSI for the moment, is to do that large-scale partnerships at local level and directly provide also the local level capacities, technical, and I would plead for participation on that social window, specifically of social parties, social partners, but also the people that know best how to deal with it instead of pure investors. But I think everybody can learn from each other. But the idea is really to do large-scale platform partnerships at local level. And that is possible with implementing partners such as the local the public banks in the country. So, and there I'm totally convinced, and a few good examples that already exist that we worked on are really including stakeholders and citizens, of course. That is the role of the local government also, to include the citizens and the stakeholders in the debate and in the formulation of the project. So, and it goes, the examples are really going beyond the silos, not just health, not just education, but a lot of the innovation goes much more closer together in these different areas. And the examples, the experiences in the regions are very much in that direction, whereas the national level very often is still very siloed. And one thing that we didn't talk about is innovative instruments, financing instruments, such as there was a lot of success with green bonds. Why? I mean, there is now the plea also to go in the direction of social bonds. Why not go into the direction of social bonds, project bonds, and use these funds also in the direction of what we want to build socially also in Europe?
Merci. Susanna, est-ce que vous voulez répondre aussi à cette...
Thank you. Susanna, would you also like to answer this criticism or add something?
Sí, yo sí quiero añadir algo más.
Yes, I would like to add something. I think that the robotization you were referring to and digitalization, which creates uncertainty in the labour market, well, that is uncertainty, it's fear, and yet it could also be an opportunity. If we invest properly in research and development and innovation, we may lose some jobs, but it will also create thousands of more, and there may even be jobs of better quality. But in terms of this social fund and in other programs of the European Union, we want to ensure, first of all, we don't waste any resources, that we don't that we ensure that social profitability goes to the same level as private profits. So they create jobs to replace jobs which are being eliminated. At the same time, we create opportunities, such as in the health sector, in biomedical research, and that will allow us to ensure that we're stronger against the big investment funds which are going to come along. And there are many countries in similar situations. And if we're stronger in the health area, then we'll create jobs as well. In the social area, I think in my presentation, I was saying that in Andalusia, we have the highest level of assistance in Europe, with around 100,000 beneficiaries. So people are at home, and yet they remain independent. And they press a button, and somebody will come and care for them. So it allows them to stay in their family circle, and they do receive care. And inside the European Union, we should have a proper debate on solidarity, on active aging, and to ensure that we have great jobs to care for people who become isolated. At the same time, we can do that by investing and by defending the welfare state. But if we lose our focus as progressives, then these public benefits will lose out in the fight to private profits.
Merci beaucoup, et je pense que ce sera le.
Thank you very much. I think that will be the final word for this session. So thank you to Liebe Francine and Susanna and Gabriela. Thank you very much indeed for having introduced these speeches. Thank you for sticking to the time. Sometimes it is difficult to keep to time. So we're at the end of this session now. So we're coming on to the conclusions. And I should like to call upon Carole Delga, the president of Occitanie, who's just arrived to speak, and also Karl-Heinz Lambert, who's the president, to give us the few final words. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Président.
Chairman or President of the Committee of the Regions, President of the Departmental Council of Aude, André, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the European Committee of the Regions, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be able to welcome you to our Occitane Pyrenees region, and I'm pleased to see the President of Umbria here, the President of Andalusia here, and Michela Fanilli, who's representing Molise, the Mayor of Sintra as well, and the President of the Workers' Group in the European Economic and Social Committee. Now, you chose to focus on good practices and social innovation in European areas and look at some of the projects which help those flourish. Well, social innovation is something which is developing. It's a sector of the future. It needs more impetus. It is developing. It's a source of richness, creating new values in our different areas and providing answers to needs that everybody feels whilst respecting sustainable development. It's very linked to individual local areas, their traditions, and very much involves the people who live there, working with companies who are bold and at the same time innovative. These are the people in the future who are going to be setting examples of excellence in our economy. Some of the initiatives sharing this philosophy are able to put economic projects at their heart, and in doing this create jobs and involve citizens. This is particularly important for young people. These are the young people who represent a third of the population in Occitanie. This gives them an opportunity to become involved, working for other people, making a contribution, and that's why it's very important that we encourage this type of activity amongst our young people. And I would personally like to thank you for the choice of topic, social innovation. Now, as the Secretary of State, I did do a lot of work trying to implement laws in this area in 2014, and I did my very best to encourage social innovation at the time. Now, we are regions very much moving forward in the area of technology. We are a centre of Airbus, of course, and we house and host European industry in those areas, but we're also at the forefront of social innovation. We have digital schooling networks here covering the whole area. We've got 16 regional digital schools, over 13 departments, and more than 1,000 people have been trained in a bit less than 2 years in this way. We also have second chance schools, which have been set up with the support of Europe. Our aim is to continue to be an area of great innovation, but also an area promoting education. And we've got the Young People's Charter, which has been financed by Europe and the regions starting this year, where schools are being given free teaching and equipment and a computer for all secondary schools who use these as pedagogical tools. I think it's also important to make the point about how vital our economy is in this respect. More than 16% of jobs are made up in this sphere, and we can also rely on Realis, which has been set up by my predecessors in Montpellier, Catalyst, and Nantes. And this helps us to pinpoint and promote projects which are promoting social innovation. There are various tools available right across our territory, and not just in urban areas. We also need to take up the challenges of which we faced in Europe, with Euroscepticism rising. We have an aging population. We have the drop in public expenditure, and we need to reaffirm our ability to bounce back in our area. We need to trust social innovation, and we need also to believe in the capacity of Europe and the regions to take up these challenges, so that we can act in turn along with the regions and work in partnership with regional powers. Now, close to the ground, we need to make sure that what needs to be done at local level can be done by setting up or introducing policies in a decentralized way so that we can provide the right answers in the right places to take up the challenges which and meet the needs which exist in the various areas, to promote the values that Europe upholds in the regions too. That's why our region of Occitanie wants to do more with the European bodies, in particular the Committee of the Regions. This is important in the light of globalization, in the increase in extremism and xenophobia, with climate challenges facing us. It's very important indeed because this provides positive results. It's not the same as austerity in that respect. But we need to rework Europe. We need to make sure that Europe continues to provide solutions. It shouldn't be seen as a problem. We need to bring Europe closer to its citizens, make sure that it can be seen to be efficient and fairer. And the reasons need to be involved in European projects on their own level. That's why future choices are important so that we can continue to feel Europe's presence in the regions. And this is going to be a new phase in promoting a stronger Europe, more based on principles of solidarity. Of course, in security and defence, we want Europe to protect us. We want a Europe which is based on cohesion and solidarity, something which can bring hope to people in the regions. We need a Europe which is in step with real life. This does exist, this type of Europe, but we need to feel more, we need to see more of it in our local areas. It needs to be brought even closer. Because the regions are also part of the European solution. Now, of course, my Europe is a Europe of the regions. That's why last May I set up the single space for representing the great region, or the grand region of Occitanie in Brussels. This is something where we're able to share what we're doing with our partners, and a place where we can work together. So we want to play a full role in the discussion, in the debate about Europe, and we want to make our voice heard. We believe more than ever in Europe, a Europe which can work with the local areas and show solidarity towards its citizens. And we need to have a very close and tight partnership with the regions, need to have contracts of trust set up, Europe working with the regions on specific projects. Now, we're thinking about the future of cohesion policy. Some people would like to get rid of this after 2020 for budgetary reasons, but I will never forget the contribution that this policy has made to our regions. Would we have been able to make the harbour in Sète without this, something which has led to an increase in turnover for the area? Would we have been able to create the high-speed train between Nîmes and Montpellier? Would we have been able to improve the energy supply for thousands of homes? Would we have been able to have the Foster Fund to help SMEs and help farmers? So this is part of employment and part of development, and it's very important that we demonstrate that Europe has made this contribution. We need to make sure that Europe is visible for citizens, and that's why we need to demonstrate that there are specific projects on the ground which enable us to put into practice the ideals that we have. I think it's very important that we continue with the CAP, even if it's going to be reformed, and continue with the cohesion policy. We need to make sure that this is done fairly and that there's a fair split between urban and rural areas. It would be very damaging for France and for Europe if we were to fail to keep the funding in place for the benefit of rural areas. There is a risk, otherwise, I think, of financing being concentrated in urban areas. We don't want less Europe, we need a better Europe. We need more and a better Europe, and more and a better social Europe. We want a Europe which will protect us from globalization, and we need to have more social values in Europe. the region is very keen to work towards this goal, so that we can make sure that European policies are better adapted to our needs locally. I think that we need to work. Algir Elkhalmi used to talk about focusing on the present, on the here and now. That's something we need to do. We need to focus in the here and now and work towards what we want to see in the future. Europe is not a dead idea. It's an idea of the future, and Europe of the regions is an idea of the future. So we all need to work together towards building this Europe, which is a human Europe and a Europe based on solidarity and trust in a shared common future. Thank you very much.
Camarades, chers collègues et
Dear colleagues and friends, let me start off by warmly thanking President Carole Delga and André Viola for their excellent welcome that we have enjoyed here since last night. It's really a very great temptation to stay here, and you've created the best conditions for us to work together. The visits showed us that progressive policymakers do make a difference on the ground, and your actions are the proof of that. I'd also like to welcome Katush Marini, my president, who has invited me to share some conclusions with you here today. I think that what we've heard shows quite clearly the fundamental strategic importance of social innovation, as well as the enormous potential that there is in our towns and our regions. That's why I really think we need to recognize across Europe what social innovation is and accelerate its development, because it strengthens social cohesion and it helps us to develop essential services which everyone can access. The Commission sometimes describes social innovation as a possible way to efficiently resolve social problems when you have austerity budgets. For us, the progressives, social innovation is not just an accessory, and it's not to be seen as the good conscience of austerity. Let's be clear, we don't want social austerity, and its economic virtues remain to be proved as well. I think that Greece shows us a lot about that. What we really need is innovation. We are the champions of the social Europe and the social economy, but we can't carry on as we did in the past because the conditions have fundamentally changed. Our success was always based on permanent growth and redistributing prosperity. I'm afraid that history has now turned the page on that. Tomorrow, the world will be changing even more than it currently does, and the situation in Europe will no longer be the same as in the past. And I think the major challenge for us today is to have a credible message, a valid message, which will allow us to meet that challenge of social justice and equality in Europe. So, dear friends, it's almost exactly 10 years ago, the 15th of September, that the Lehman Brothers company went bankrupt, which really was the start of the most serious financial, economic and social crises of the last years. And contrary to what we wish to see, Europe did not set up the necessary rules and checks to make sure that wasn't possible in the future to take place again. I can remember what was said at the time. But if I compare the promises made then with what actually has taken place, I think that it's very disappointing. And one can be sad and angry, because I think if you look at the way the financial world has behaved, then you will discover a great many parallels with what was going on before. Banks were saved with public money, we had the public debt crisis, but nothing really changed. And I think that is a really serious fundamental problem we'll have to tackle in the future. And what's more, budgets have been cut, and cut even in wealthy countries. Let's talk about a very rich country, Germany. Somebody said one day, an SPD chancellor candidate who didn't succeed, but not talking about the most recent elections, but we need to do what we can to make sure that schools in Germany you don't recognize them because they're the most run-down buildings in the town. Now, if you look in German cities and around the rest of Europe as well, have a look at what's being done and what the consequences are of austerity, largely due to the Germans as well, who continue to shrink investment in public services. We need investments. We need intelligent investment. And in order to do that, you need money. I haven't really seen an honest way of investing without money, to be perfectly frank. And I think we need to change European rules on this. Because I think it's this mathematic-based approach, the famous 3% and 60% criteria and the convergence criteria, and no one can really tell you where that came from in the first place. And even and these bean counters who just blindly follow rules, meaning that investments have to be linked to just the year that they're made, which no private company would ever do, and are being followed with the zeal of evangelicals following the commandments. Well, we need to change all of that, or at least give it more flexible so that we can be a bit more realistic with our investments. And that's an important fight which we will have to engage in. Almost 1/4 of Europe's population is facing or risks falling into poverty, and that's a figure that has been stagnating for a long time, and that is an absolute scandal. No socialist worthy of the name can accept that or consider that something which is, just, well, it's a shame, but it's inevitable. What's more, and this is quite disappointing for me personally, because when I was young, things were different, but things don't always change in the right way. The most recent post-war generation is the one which has the least social mobility compared with previous generations. Now, more than before, if you compare that with a certain time after the war, young people's opportunities are not dependent on that person's ability to work, their wish to change, or their intelligence. It's to do with how rich the family is in which they're born into. And that, again, is something that a socialist just cannot accept. We cannot accept someone who, either the idea of someone working round the clock and not earning enough to actually be able to live a decent life based on his earnings, and to feed his or her family. These are fundamental things which are going wrong and which we need to change, and it's up to us to really take the bull by the horns. And in order to do this, we're going to need a lot of innovation. But we're very much in line with the major promises which are written into the European treaties. It was said in the treaties that you need to make economic and social progress. Economically, we've made progress. The crisis, of course, has rubbed out some of it, but socially, we needed 20 years to finally, last year in Gothenburg, have a second social summit. Even though the president of the Council of Ministers back then, and that was still the time of the rotating presidencies. Jean-Claude Juncker said, well, in 2 years, we should do another. And we needed a lot more than 2 years, didn't we? What we adopted in Gothenburg was progress. It was there were certain rights we adopted, but also it was a whole wish list of good intentions, even though the document that we drew up was a very nice one. We need to do more than that. It's not enough just to rely on or make an appeal to the goodwill of member states if we actually want to make progress on that front. We need resources, and the European structural funds play a key role here, and the cohesion policy in particular. That's one of the main long-term investment policies of the European Union, and it needs to remain so. And we need to fight those who want to tell us that cohesion policy is an outmoded policy, belongs to yesterday, we should do something new now, we need new challenges. No, no, no. Cohesion policy is more relevant now than ever because it's a way to do policies linked up between different levels of power, and it is a policy which allows you to meet the major challenges of the moment. And that is particularly the case for the European Social Fund. With the discussions we're having on the new financial framework, it's now that the future of this policy is up for grabs, and it's proved its worth in the past, and we need it. The European Social Fund has helped 7.4 million people to find a job and 8.9 million people to obtain new qualifications during the current programming period. And it's called upon to carry on playing a growing role in the years to come in order for us to really live these social rights which I talked about before. So that's why I would like to remind us all of what our major demands are for the new European Social Fund, and in light of the new negotiations on the financial framework. I think that it's so important for local and regional authorities, and so for the future of this fund, it needs to remain directly accessible for regions, and it needs to be a co-managed instrument, co-managed by the regions too. We're happy that the social fund is staying within the cohesion policy framework. Some people wanted to change that because that allows us to create synergies with financial actions which are financed by other structural funds, and we should say no to any attempts to centralize the European social funds, which sometimes you can discover when you look at documents which are currently being tabled. There is a rapporteur who just spoke a short while ago. My colleague from Andalusia has an important role to play. And I hope that Mrs. Yassar's report will produce something very strong and very clear on this, and I don't doubt for a second that she will do anything other than everything she can on that front. It's important, I think, that the bottom-up approach remains essential in this area, because it's really on the ground, at grassroots level, that things happen in the context of the social fund, as we saw very well today in the visits we made. Now, we need to perhaps look at those who want to integrate the social fund too much in the European semester. Now, it's fair enough to say that in the European semester you should introduce something which comes from the Gothenburg summit and that brings social ideas into that. But I think we need to be careful there, because this European semester is something which isn't always focused on long-term objectives, and that's certainly not. It certainly doesn't have social objectives as its priority. The European Social Fund should not simply become a tool to finance a reform of the labour market or a pension system. there's also the risk that regions might be taken hostage by funds being blocked from the social funds because a member state hasn't actually met its macroeconomic obligations for that particular semester. So there's work to be done there, and we're really going to have to keep our eyes open. Another subject which Mrs. Fransson raised, and I like to raise too, and that's the role of financial instruments in social policy. Now, I really believe, and we've had discussions on this in the past, but we really need to know what we're talking about. It's all very nice to talk about financial instruments, but what that means is that you're taking away subsidies and replacing them with loans. Now, there's more possibilities to do this now than there were in the past because we all like to receive subsidies, don't we, and continue to work. But I think there's some real opportunities here. But at the same time, we need to think carefully and have specific criteria for the social sector if we want to make progress there. It's possible, but not easy. So I think we all need to be able to, or we need to be ready to innovate there in that sector. So, dear friends, if we want strong cohesion policies anchored in all of the regions, well, in order to do that, we have created a cohesion alliance, and I'm one of the signatories of all of the French regions and the French departments and towns and cities and metropolitan areas. We've been able to make positive change to the Commission's proposed regulation in this area, and we will continue to do so as the objectives which are set out. We will continue to try our best to achieve the objectives set out in our own alliance document. But now it's up to the Parliament and the Member States. We need to make an appeal to them. The Commission's done its work, and I've often said, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Oettinger, let's talk football terms for a minute. All the French will suddenly be happy. The Commission, I think, put the ball right in the middle of the pitch. It could have been a lot different. But we haven't got to the end of the match. We're still at the start. So let me send out a very strong appeal to all of you to do everything you can to influence your respective national governments, to make sure they're working in the right direction and that they defend strong cohesion policies. It's very important. It's difficult. We can't accept these 10% cuts in cohesion policy, and cohesion policy needs to continue to use a third of EU, to have a third of EU monies earmarked to it. But there'll be lots more debates necessary. There'll be arguments too. But we need to know what direction we want to go in, and the Commission of the Regions has an important role to play here. And I'm convinced that our activities today has allowed us to strengthen ourselves, to put us in the right direction, and to make sure that we can actually renew our efforts to go in the right direction. And we'll be amplifying that still further when we take our work back to the Committee of the Regions and join forces with the S&D group in the European Parliament. It's a great alliance, and we'll be talking more about it in a little while. Thank you for your attention.
My